Get ready to uncover how schools manipulate students' thoughts, stifle their potential, and how politicians steal money in the future of America from kids. Welcome to the JB Sills Show.
Welcome back to the JB Sills Show. Hello, persons from the future watching this video, because it's probably going to be about a week before this comes out, so this should be fun.
Depending on how fast I can work and stuff.
Well, we're going to be doing it together. We're going to be doing a new format, so I hope you're enjoying it. We'll see what she's putting for this part of the video. We don't really know what we're doing yet.
Nope.
Anyway, today I'd like to take a break from all the craziness, all the, our insane school system and our insane state of affairs today as a country, and talk about this thing called education. And I'm sure it comes as no surprise that education has fueled everything, pretty much everything that's been good. Everything that's been good. Everyone, all the greatest thinkers and people throughout all of history, all of the greatest men and women ever have been educated, at least in the traditional sense. So I thought that we should probably do some talking about it. And we've talked about a lot how homeschooling is the best way to get an education, but what we've never even done on this show is define what education actually is, because it's probably not what you think. Today we're sold by the establishment, by the school establishment, by all the dictionaries that education is schooling. Education is being taught by a state certified teacher, is being told what everything is, how everything is, what you're supposed to think, not how you're supposed to think, but what to think. That's what we're sold. What the definition of education is. That's what we are sold today. But there's just one problem with that. That has not been true for thousands and thousands of years. Now let me explain. Going back to ancient Greece, they had no formal schooling. They sort of did, but teaching was completely deprofessionalized. It was not a professionalized field. There were no state certified teachers. You had a couple of years of schooling in ancient Greece for boys, but not much. And then you had all these academies where it was completely informal. It was basically just like having a discussion all day. It was talking with the greatest minds, Plato, Aristotle, all those people.
Which would be a great thing to have in this country, because talking really gets learning.
Right, talking is, where you're thinking out your opinions. That's the only way to know what you really think, is to actually talk through your opinions.
You learn from others. Right,
but that's not what we have today. What we have today is this polarized place where, one side gets all their information from their ideological allies and does not listen to any of their ideological opponents. That's not education. And I would go far as to say that less than 10% of people today in America are educated, at least in the traditional sense. And then if you look at all the greatest Americans throughout history, right? You look at, George Washington, right? He's pretty beloved still. That's kind of changing, but he's generally thought of as a pretty smart guy, right? He did not have any formal schooling, not even a little bit. In fact, he was in his early life, he mapped stuff. He was is it like cartographer?
Maybe.
I think that's what it is. He mapped stuff. He mapped stuff out, and that was his education. He learned math that way. He learned geometry that way, all these stuff. That's how he got his education. And he would obviously go on to basically be the father of America and be its first president. And that was the case with many other founding fathers. Many of them got no education. But wait a minute, I hear you saying. What about, in today's world? Well, today there are very few people that don't go to public school, but those that are homeschooled tend to actually fare much better in life. People that are homeschooled or even private schooled, to be honest, tend to have much better, not only test scores and stuff like that, which is, somewhat meaningless, but not only do they beat the public schools at their own game, but they also, homeschoolers, they make more money, and there's even studies that show that they are less polarized, that they're more open to changing their mind, that they're more free thinking. Think of that. We're sold by the media that if you're homeschooled, you're gonna be indoctrinated into religious fanaticism, right? That's the only purpose of homeschooling.
You're gonna be very antisocial.
But actually, what we have so far, the data we have so far shows that homeschoolers are more free thinking, they're more open minded, instead of less, instead of being these religious fanatics. So it's not true. None of it's true. And then if you go back to the 1800s, where you had all these captains of industry, Like, for instance, Vanderbilt, starting off with Vanderbilt, he started his life in his early teens and preteens. He was running basically a boating. He was running basically a little boating empire, where he went around ferrying stuff. You go to people like Edison, who begged his mother not to send him to school. Thomas Edison begged his mother not to send him to school and went off to work at a train station. People like Rockefeller and Carnegie dropped out in elementary school. All these people, the greatest Americans ever in these ways. And there were many others. There are many other writers. I think Margaret Mead had pretty much no schooling, and so many others. So many of the most successful Americans got education, not schooling. And this is something that actually Tolstoy kind of figured out. Tolstoy figured out that education has to be driven by creativity and free thinking, and not box standard schoolhouses. Tolstoy figured this out, where he said, we don't need rigid discipline. We need creativity. That's how you get an education. And that's how historically it's happened.
I mean, you're not going to learn anything when you're forced to go from class to class, day after day.
Right? And because not only are you being told something in a horrible environment, but you actually get no experience. I mean, what is the first thing that happens when you enter school? You're literally secluded off from the rest of the world. That's the first thing that happens. You are put in these, brick walls where you are completely secluded from the rest of the world, from the outside world. No, the best way to get an education outside of creativity and driving your own, your own urge to learn, the best way to get an education is to have huge amounts of experiences front-loaded at you. So if you're a parent, you're asking, okay, what can I do? Front-load as much experience as possible at your kids. Show them how to do everything you possibly can. That is one of the best ways to get an education. Is when you have huge amounts of experience front-loaded at you. That's one of the keys.
Another really useful skill that schools don't teach is typing.
Yes.
Typing is very useful. Teach your kids how to touch type.
Yeah, I don't know how to do that. I probably shouldn't I?
You probably should.
Yeah. There's certainly things in the modern world. I mean, our schools are horrible in innovation. They are not innovative at all. If you compare measurements of innovation for our schools and then you say Europe or Finland, you'll see that our schools fall way behind. Our schools are stuck in the past, as they were intended to be, by the way. But yes, experience is absolutely key. That is one of the major parts. And there's no one right way to get an education. There's not even several right ways. There's infinite ways to get an education. But there's also some ways that you don't get an education. And a way that you don't get an education is by going from class to class all day, having state-certified, college-educated elite teachers tell stuff to you. And that's not to say teachers are bad. Most teachers have very good intentions. They want to do good. They're good people. I can personally say that. But that does not change the fact that when you're in school, you are not getting educated. You are getting schooled. And schooling is, in the way we think of it, is one of the most radical ideas in human history. Think about that. Think what people would say 300 or even 200 years ago if you said, I want kids for 7 hours a day, 5 days a week, to be completely separated from their families and to be taught by people who have been personally approved and selected by the state. Think about it. Think of if someone said that 200 or 300 years ago. You'd go, what? Excuse me? Are you saying? Do you need to go somewhere else? I mean, that's craziness. That's absolute craziness. We don't need state certified teachers. We don't need these massive brick buildings, which are absolute eyesores. Not to mention they're eyesores. We don't need all this. We don't need to turn play into some top-down operation. We don't need to stop creativity. We don't need public schools, actually. And what we've learned is that they've been an absolute failure. Let me just give you one example. Literacy. So we've talked about literacy quite a bit, right? And we have a huge literacy problem, tens of millions of illiterate adults, many more who are only marginally literate. Only 30% of college-educated students can fully comprehend a newspaper article, which is somewhat terrifying. And only about 20% of the population is highly literate, because we use whole language or balanced literacy, blah, 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 instead of phonics. So, here's the thing. Here's the funny thing about all this. You know those things called the Middle Ages? Those dark eras of depression and depravity and merciless warfare? You know those times? We are barely more literate today than people were back then. And I wish I was making that up. Well, that's lovely. I wish I was making that up. We are barely, marginally more literate today than we were in the Middle Ages. Because in the Middle Ages, you actually had quite a decent literacy rate considering the time, because people were smart enough to know, hey, if the language is phonetic, maybe we should use phonics. Of course, they didn't call it back then, but that's what it was. Where you teach the letters, you teach the sounds of the letters, and before you know it, the kid knows how to read. But of course, today we need whole language, because that's, it's new and improved, right? Anyway, I think I'm supposed to wrap up the show pretty early today, so I think that's going to be about it with that last example of how we do not need schooling, and it has only hurt us. We need education, we don't need schooling.
Kids need to go and get experience in the real world.
Alright, please do subscribe to the show, like I said in the last episode. Thank you for over 100 subscribers, very epic. If you have any questions, you can email me, jbsilshow@gmail.com. Please do follow me on Twitter. Subscribe and share. That's the most important thing. Share it with your friends, nephews, relatives, everything. I don't know why I just said nephews. But have a great rest of your day in quarantine, maybe, unless you live in Georgia. So, until next time, I've been your host, JB.
And I've been producer Brooke.
And we are signing off.